Hello, Jakarta and the world. This is White Trash Talking. I'm Doug Johnson, and I'll be talking to you about issues relating to Jakarta, the U.S., and the world. As a U.S. citizen now living in Jakarta, I touch on issues relating to the West and the East, the United States and Indonesia, and to the world events in general, because everything is related and interconnected. I recently reread an amazing book by Sheldon Wolin called Democracy Incorporated, Managed Democracy and the Specter of Inverted Totalitarianism, which I recommend to everyone. I'm indebted to Wolin for the insights I'm about to share, along with Chomsky and Matt Taibbi. It got me thinking about why we vote, and should we even bother? Let me explain what I mean. Before Joe Biden was elected as the 46th U.S. president, he spent roughly 47 years in the Senate, where he helped dismantle important safeguards of the American people. He voted to pass NAFTA, cut welfare and Social Security, increase military spending for disastrous foreign wars, and allow the wholesale surveillance of the U.S. public. He helped draft the Omnibus Crime Bill, which militarized the police and quadrupled the U.S. prison population. He voted to repeal the Glass-Steagall Act that separated commercial and investment banking, and to deregulate both the banking industry and the FCC. As president, he's against universal health care for all and supports for-profit insurance and the pharmaceutical corporations. He's against free education and student debt forgiveness, and he has recently supported and facilitated two more disastrous wars, the wars in Ukraine and now in Gaza. Not to mention that he's one of the most corrupt politicians ever. Biden has spent his entire political career gutting the working and middle classes while creating the largest transfer and concentration of wealth into the top 0.1% of the ruling class. He's certainly not by the people, for the people. What happened to our democracy? How could people vote for someone like Biden, who is clearly deaf to our demands? It's very clear what the American people want. They want universal health care, a $15 minimum wage, more responsible fiscal policy, sustainable community development, free education, and better environmental protections, just to name a few. But Biden, or any other president for that matter, is the wrong person to look to. The office of the presidency is awash in cash from large pharmaceutical companies, oil and power corporations, large real estate developers, and hundreds of other special interest groups that capture the presidency and other governing bodies by financing the campaigns and paying huge bribes. American presidents are beholden to the ruling class, the richest 1%, who have half the world's wealth and who finance their political parties. American presidents do not represent the people. The seeds of our current anti-democratic system of government actually began with the framers of the U.S. Constitution who feared majority rule. James Madison, for example, in the 10th Federalist Paper, wrote that although he preferred democracy over other forms of government, there were problems in creating a democratic society. In a society where there are great disparities of wealth, the poor would use their voting power to reduce these disparities by taking property from the rich. Madison and other elite writers felt this would be unfair. Aristotle had raised the same concern about democratic rule over 2 millennia earlier. However, while Aristotle said the solution was to reduce inequality, Madison's solution was to reduce democracy. Madison believed that the rich landowners should rule the country and that one of the primary goals of government is to protect the rich minority from the majority. The founding writers believed that democratic majority rule was the biggest threat to the new republic. In Sheldon Wolin's book, Democracy Incorporated, he states that the founding writers designed a constitutional framework meant to preserve systemic inequality. Wolin adds, quote, "While they recognized the people as a political presence, they proceeded to dilute the potential of democratic power by constraints intended to filter out any grand schemes. An elaborate system of checks and balances, separation of powers, an electoral college to select a president, and later judicial review were designed to make it next to impossible for popular majorities to institute policies actually in the interest of the majority. The founding writers were, according to Wolin, the first proponents of managed democracy. They designed a system to subordinate the so-called irrational and temperamental people who, they believed, threatened their interest and were not capable of running the country. The framers saw themselves as the caretakers of these irrational people. Madison wrote, quote, "When the people misunderstood their own true interests, it was the duty of their guardians to withstand the temporary delusion," end quote. Except for times when the people took their fight to the streets to forge the civil rights movement and achieve other important democratic victories, power has largely resided with the ruling class. The ruling class, however, were not the vaunted guardians as they had claimed. As presidential powers grew and the elites expanded their reign of power throughout North America, the Western Hemisphere, and then the world, the possibility of democratic involvement was nullified almost entirely. Military issues and budgets, as well as international politics in general, were kept off limits to the people. What developed was what Sheldon Wolin calls inverted totalitarianism, which, instead of a dictatorship, means, quote, rule by diverse powers such as corporate capital, the very rich, small business associations, large media organizations, and evangelical Protestant leaders, end quote. And the models of organization tend to be corporate as well as military. Instead of enforcing unanimity, inverted totalitarianism conquers by dividing the people. Instead of abolishing opposition, it keeps the pretense of democracy alive by allowing for token concessions. The disparity of power between the ruling class and the people is now staggering beyond comprehension. This is reflected in the current class-based tax cuts, the appointment of class-biased judges, the elimination of social programs for the poor, the removal of environmental protections, the dismantling of the separation of church and state, and the fusion of corporations into politics. Most, if not all, democratic institutions have been captured, including the presidency, Congress, the judicial and penal system, the media, and the national electoral system. To understand how a cognitively impaired, anti-democratic crook like Joe Biden could win the presidential election, you have to understand the ruling class's ability to manipulate our thoughts and actions. Did we really choose him, or was he chosen for us? Prior to elections, the people are polarized by mainstream news outlets that increase their profits by tailoring and distorting the news for their constituents. They avoid stories that contradict their viewers' beliefs and rarely present alternative viewpoints, as this is bad for business. At election time, the people lack an adequate understanding of current events and are thus unable to discuss and debate with their neighbors. The political parties capitalize on their confusion by splintering them into smaller subgroups and then targeting them with messages and sound bites pertaining to their values and their prejudices. This further divides and distracts them, making it nearly impossible to form majority agreement about the issues they care most about. Most do not even know they live in a totalitarian state and that the person they just voted for represents the antithesis of what they care about. As a massive tidal wave of totalitarian power looms over us, a destructive force that long ago escaped the reins of democratic control, it's perhaps delusional fantasy to think our choice for president will ameliorate the ravages to our democracy and bring back the notion of the common good. I don't think our vote has much effect. I hope I'm wrong. I'm Doug Johnson. You've been listening to White Trash Talking. I wrestle with the truth and often lose. Let me know if you agree or disagree with my views. Thank you for joining me.